Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really powerful idea. What if a fundamental law of physics, the law of motion, is actually the key to unlocking our entire spiritual lives? So, let's just jump right in with the big, provocative question from our source material. I mean, we see motion everywhere, right? From galaxies spinning in space to the atoms inside of us. But what if that exact same principle, that constant, unstoppable motion, also governs our deepest, most personal search for meaning?
Okay, so let's start with something we can all agree on, the law of motion. It's everywhere. It's what keeps the planets in orbit and what makes the cells in our bodies work. In the physical world, it's not really up for debate. It's a fact.
In this idea of motion, it doesn't just stop with things we can see and touch. Just think about how we talk about our minds. We use these powerful words, right? Like trauma or anxiety. What are those, really? But ways of describing the powerful unseen forces, that internal motion, that are constantly shaping our emotional landscape.
But here's where things get tricky. This is where the map starts to get a little fuzzied for a lot of us. The second we start talking about our spiritual lives, our understanding of this universal law of motion just seems to fall apart. What does motion even mean when we're talking about the spirit?
So yeah, before we can go any further, we really have to get on the same page here. To even begin to explore spiritual activity, we first have to figure out what our source material even means when it says spiritual life. And you know, part of the problem as our source sees it is just the language we use. We throw around all these different words for this inner part of ourselves: mind, gut, soul, spirit, psyche. And all this variety can actually muddy the waters, because each of those words carries its own unique baggage and meaning.
So just for our exploration today, we're going to stick with the word spirit. And our source defines it pretty clearly. It's our core inner essence. It's something distinct and separate from our intellect, our thoughts, or our gut feelings and emotions.
Okay, so with that definition locked in, let's take a look at how people actually do this stuff. How do they engage in this spiritual activity? Our source material helpfully maps out 6 main paths of inquiry that are really common today. First up, and probably the most familiar to most of us, is religion. This is the structured stuff, the rituals, the prayers, studying the doctrines, and following a set of rules for how to live, all of which usually comes from the teachings of some kind of foundational messenger or prophet.
But here's where we hit a snag, according to the source. It makes the argument that over centuries, human interpretations have often twisted or misunderstood the original teachings, and that creates a kind of spiritual traffic jam that actually stalls real progress instead of encouraging it.
All right, path number 2 is philosophy. This literally means the love of wisdom. This is the path of pure reason and critical thinking, of trying to wrestle with life's biggest questions. Why are we here? What is real? Using the power of the mind. The problem here, though, as the source sees it, is the tool you're using. Philosophy relies entirely on the intellect. But what if the spiritual realm is just different, something beyond what our brains can compute? If that's the case, then relying on intellect alone is kind of like trying to measure the temperature of the room with a ruler. The tool just isn't right for the job. Path number 3 takes us into some pretty mysterious territory, the occult. We're talking about things like magic, divination, astrology, practices that deal with hidden knowledge and forces that are, way outside the scope of what we'd call normal science. And this is where the source gets really serious and asks a pretty tough question about responsibility. Is it really a good idea to just dabble in these incredibly powerful forces without fully understanding them? It's kind of compared to how we used things like lead or asbestos for years before we had any clue just how dangerous they really were. Okay, our 4th path is spiritism, and this is all about trying to build a bridge between our world and other dimensions. The main idea is communicating with spirits who have passed on, usually through a medium, to try and get some wisdom that can help us out here on Earth. Now, the big critique here is all about translation. The source suggests that life in those other dimensions might operate under totally different rules, especially when it comes to time and space. So if you take a message from over there and just apply it literally to our reality here, you could end up making some really misguided and even harmful decisions. Next up, we have the path of the mystic. This approach basically bypasses all the external stuff, the books, the doctrines, the rituals. Instead, it's all about achieving a direct personal and intuitive connection with a higher reality, usually through things like deep meditation or contemplation. It's all about that inner knowing. But the potential downside here is that lack of a clear roadmap. Without some kind of structure, it's really hard to know if you're making progress.
And the source warns that this ambiguity can, 1, open the door for con artists, and 2, it can even lead sincere people to get lost in their own imaginations.
And finally, we get to path number 6, which is really defined by taking a neutral position. The agnostic or the freethinker looks at all this and says, you know what, there's no definitive proof that a higher power exists. So the only truly objective stance is to just say, I don't know.
Now, the source offers a very sharp critique of this. It says that demanding proof from the outside without making any personal effort to investigate, especially when you have the ability to do so, isn't really objectivity. The source calls it an indolence of spirit, basically a reluctance to engage in the very motion that the law of motion demands of us. Okay, so we've just walked through 6 very different paths, right? And they are all just filled with spiritual motion, with activity, with searching. But this is where all of that motion slams headfirst into a huge central paradox.
And this slide illustrates the core idea perfectly. Think about it this way. In any system, the laws exist to help achieve the goals of some higher principle. So the laws in a country are supposed to uphold the values laid out in its constitution. By that same logic, the source proposes that the laws of creation are like subsets of a supreme guiding principle.
So here's the crucial point. If we are genuinely engaging in spiritual activity, and if we're following these spiritual laws, the logical outcome should be progress. We should be seeing more harmony, more peace, real, tangible spiritual development, both in ourselves and in the world around us.
And that leaves us with the final, really challenging question that our source poses. With all of this motion, all this praying and thinking and searching and meditating across all 6 of these paths for thousands of years, why does it seem like, as a whole, we haven't made more progress? It's a massive question, and it's one that really sets the stage for a much, much deeper investigation.